Hamstring flexibility. If we want to train the hamstrings to be flexible, the last thing we want to be doing is train them in this back and forth one plane of motion. The last thing we want to be doing is stretching them just in this sagittal plane motion here, which a lot of people do. If we want to be strengthening the hamstrings and training them, the last thing we want to be doing is laying on our front, lifting our heel to our bum with weights in our legs or on these weight machines and things like that, because that's just not going to cut it. That's going to get the hamstrings strong in one plane of motion, the sagittal plane, backwards and forwards, but we're going to get nothing in the transverse plane and we're going to get nothing in the frontal plane. And if you expect that to transfer over to when you're running, jumping, throwing a ball, twisting, turning, it's just not going to do it. It's just not going to transfer over. When we think of the hamstrings, the semitendinosus and the semimembranosus, and they start to come around the inside and tie immediately just past the knee, and then the bicep femoris starts to come around laterally, that's a lot of transverse movement in that muscle. It tells us this is a muscle that's really strong in the transverse plane. And then when we think of that knee, when our foot hits the floor, the calcaneus everts, the tibia goes down and in, that takes the femur and the knee down and in. You can see that's really lengthening the hamstring here, and the hamstring is actually catching the knee to put it back in a transverse and frontal plane motion. It's coming this way and it's really decelerating this transverse motion here. But what it's not doing is it's not doing this sagittal plane here. The sagittal plane's already been switched on by the swing of the leg, which incidentally still takes us into this kind of side to side frontal plane shift and this rotation of the pelvis here anyway. So when we're thinking of hamstring flexibility or just training the hamstrings for strength, we don't want to be training them just in this front and back sagittal movement. We want to be training it in all angles. We want to be training it in as many planes as possible, 3 planes optimally if we can. So if we just start on some hamstring flexibility now, we also realise that we've not just got one end of a hamstring. A lot of people train the hamstring and they just sit back in the hip and they pull the toes up or they leave the toes down. Yeah, so you're going to get a stretch at the distal end. You're going to get a stretch at the insertion down the bottom. But we've also got a proximal end of the hamstring up at the pelvis, which a lot of people forget about stretching. So we're just going to go through some different planes of motion to stretch the proximal end, the distal end, and in all 3 planes of motion, sagittal, transverse, and frontal. So we just step back. At first we're just stepping back, raising the heel and coming back. This is the kind of hamstring stretch that everybody knows. We never hold a stretch, which is literally a second in and out. Coming back. So this time as we're coming back, we make sure the knee locks back. Try not to use the quad to pull the knee up, because a lot of people, to get knee extension, they start to use the quad and pull up and jam that kneecap. So just coming back, let the knee drop into that space that's created by the extension. Okay, then we go back again. This time, start to pull the big toe up. So when we go back, pull the big toe up. The big toe will activate the hamstring even more. As we pull the big toe up in gait when we're walking and running, it's that gives us the extra clearance to get the legs swung through and lengthen our stride. So without the big toe activation, you're not really going to get a good stride either. So now this is very sagittal. So what we want to do now is shift the weight outside. See my hips coming over, outside my ankle. My ankle's here, my foot and ankle's here, and the hips over here. It's not like most people sitting back on the leg that's resting. So we want to be over here. That's really going to switch on the bicep femoris. So as we come over, this is going to now give us this frontal plane hamstring stretch. It's giving us transverse plane because we're still pulling that big toe up, which is connecting through the heel, extending the knee, and we're now getting frontal plane side to side here. We're also getting some transverse as well because of the pelvis shifting as well as the heel. And this is where the knee locked out. So this is getting very proximal. This is getting the distal end. So now we think, well, we want the proximal end up at the hip. So when my leg moves, my knee extends. Yeah, I'm getting a hamstring stretch here. But there's a point when our knee's actually bent and our pelvis has to bend when we step through for gait as well. So we need to get the proximal end of the hamstring as well. So this time we have our knee slightly softened, so we've not got a pull at the distal end, and we just sit back, push the hip back, so we get a pull more at the top end of the hamstring. So now this is hitting the more proximal end. This is hitting more up at the ischium, and we're now stretching more of the origin of the hamstring rather than just insertion. So here we step back, So now we're getting proximal end as well as the distal end. And then we start to just move the hand across. So you can see now I'm getting proximal end and I'm getting transverse movement as the hip shifts out. The hand driving, I'm using my right hand as an authentic driver to drive the hip out to the right, which is now giving me a different feeling through the hamstring as I'm stretching it. And then we come more transverse right the way around, really stretching over, so I get more frontal plane movement. You feel like it's the top of the hamstring, even starts to get into the glute. Giving me more frontal plane movement in the hip, and the rotation round is now giving me transverse plane movement. We then take that back to our distal end. So instead of the knee bent, we now have the knee lengthened, and we do this same reach again. If we don't warm the hamstring up, knees free planes, proximal and distal end, chances of being able to get through intensity, hard exercise at full intensity is pretty limited because it's just not going to transfer over to your chosen sport or just day-to-day life. So then we go proximal end, reach in, come back, stretch, distal end. And these you obviously do both sides as well. We now got the coming down, distal end, and we're reaching the other way. Get a slightly different feeling through the hamstring again. Just go as low as you're comfortable. And we'll go proximal end again, we soften the knee. And here you're really driving the hip back till you really feel like getting to the hamstring. And these are obviously both sides. I'm just doing one leg at the moment, just because of the length of the video. But then as we're coming back, we want the bend, proximal end, then we want rotation, the opposite side. Why do we do this? Because when we're in gait and when we're running, we have opposite rotations. Let this back hip drop lower. See the hike on this side comes lower, because that's what we get when we're in a phase of gait. Head goes with it at first, then we keep our head level and we're just facing forward. So we have, as we go back, pelvis to the right, cervical spine to the, thoracic spine to the left, sorry, and then cervical spine back to the centre. So when we're running and we're in gait, this is the movement we get with our spine, 3 rotations. Come here, then we put this into our distal end with our locked out knee. Same thing, we come around, but we keep the head forwards for 3 rotations through the spine. So with all of these so far, we've kept the other foot on the floor. So we've come back to give us mobility, so our body feels we've got the other foot on the floor, so it feels comfortable allowing the extra movement. But what we need when we're running, twisting, turning, throwing, whatever we're doing, we've very rarely got both feet on the floor. We're usually one foot to the other foot. So what we want to do is train our hamstring to be flexible with the mobility and the stability. So what we do is we start to take this leg away, so it's not so much planted down, but it's just more of a toe touch. Same movement, but this isn't coming heavy back now, this back leg, it's just a toe touch. So I've got more weight, and my hamstring on the left, this leg I'm training or mobilising, whilst training all these same movements, is now having to deal with the new mobility whilst stabilising a bit more. Even to the sides, we do these different movements just with a toe touching down instead of full weight on it. So our body learns to handle it when we're on one leg, running, jumping, twisting, turning. From then we take all the same exercises again, and we take even the toe touch away. So now we're up and we don't even touch the ground. We just keep reaching out, stretching the hamstring in all these different angles. So here, we're still getting the proximal end of the hamstring, but I'm just not, before I was touching the floor, now I'm not touching the floor, so my body's learning to handle the new mobility when my leg's off the floor, and it's learning to handle mobility with stability, because that's the way we eventually need it to perform. So you take everything, even the ones we did before with a twist, and you see this leg doesn't touch the floor because we're learning it to handle mobility with stability. Okay, so that's just a little bit of how to get into the hamstrings, immobilise them in all three planes and make it as functional as possible for your particular sport. Whether it's for sport or it's for everyday life, the hamstrings, like every muscle in the body, still needs to be turned on in as many angles and positions as possible, approximately all three planes. Thank you.